Okay, hi, thank you for having me speak today. It's a big job to talk about the why we must bevare mere. It's super important to talk about the root cause of our crisis. I'm going to aim to do that in 15 minutes, so bear with me as I blow through a lot of information. As mentioned, you'll get the slides after and you can fact check. Great, we're going to start with the why. This is my why. We have one planet, and I think it's worth preserving. Right now, we are not doing such a good job of taking care of it, and I think it's super important that we actually think about it's finite. We have one. This is it to serve all purposes for life on this earth. At the moment, we are not treating it so well. Maybe for the last century, but things are getting a bit critical. This year, we've reached a temperature that we have never recorded before. We are at a 1.5 warming degree scenario for 12 months in a row, and the temperature is climbing, both on Earth and on land. And this is a bit about our exponential growth we've had over the last century, both in our economy, in our material use, in our population growth, and these things coalesce. And several years ago, in 1972, the Club of Rome commissioned a report, which they titled The Limits to Growth. And in this report, they wanted to find out if we continue to grow exponentially, as we do today, in the 70s already, what would this look like for life on this planet? And what they found out is that our systems would eventually collapse. This year, this model was updated, and it's alarmingly accurate compared to how they predicted it. And what it tells us is that we actually are reaching Earth's limits. The limits to growth are real, and we have to do something about it. And that's really what we're all here to talk about today. How can we use what we have? Oftentimes, when we are asked to talk about a crisis like climate change, we only see one part of the puzzle and we forget to think systemically. We tend to work in silos, and we actually need to work in a more systemic way. In Limits to Growth, they kind of illustrated this. What we call today the poly crisis, that all of our major issues are connected in some way, and if we're only looking at one piece of the puzzle, we miss opportunities in other spaces. So it's super important that we think holistically. Oftentimes, when one system destabilizes, it impacts another, right? This is Ecology 101. We have to see ourselves a part of Earth's systems and understand that when one thing goes majorly wrong, like overuse of fossil fuels, we're going to lead to other instabilities. We see this happening today. It's predictable, and we know it's coming, and until now we have not been brave enough to sort of pump the brakes before we get to collapse. If we're going to talk about where we need to go, we need to understand how we got here. I think we all know that about 150 years ago, our civilizations became more complex. We had an industrial revolution, and since then we have been consuming more and more resources from the planet, primarily in fossil fuels. Over that time, we have thankfully become more efficient, and this is important to recognize. We have been better at using that energy. Unfortunately, at the same time, the demand for energy has also increased on a global level. So all of the good innovations we've had in terms of wind, solar, are additive to the energy demand, meaning we haven't really had a green revolution. We've had green addition. When we look at these two things together, they can be explained through Jevons paradox. Jevons paradox states that when we are really efficient and save money and energy in one space, we tend to just use it in another space. He also says that if we do this without setting caps to the amount we use, that energy or efficiency without sufficiency, meaning actual limits, becomes waste, or in our case, excess. We know that the consumption of fossil fuels and burning of them has led us to this point where we have way too much carbon in the atmosphere, and this is directly correlated with GDP, energy, material use, and population growth. We call this the growth knot. Until now, we have not found a way to decouple these these phenomena from each other in a sufficient pace or to a sufficient degree. This is also true in Denmark, in case you're curious. In black is what we measure in Denmark, in our reporting sectors, and everything above that is actual emissions that happen in other places. So when we actually look at the real impact of what we're doing, we've actually increased emissions rather than reducing them since the 1990s. At the same time, we're consuming so much material, and we're going way beyond Earth's capacity to regenerate. So our material throughput in 2020 was double that what the Earth can actually withstand. To put this in context, in 2020, there was more human-made materials on this planet than living biomass. We are turning this into a dead planet. In ecology, this phenomenon of outgrowing our space is called overshoot. And that's the crisis we're in today. It's not just about climate change, it's about overshoot. This is why we've exceeded 6 out of 9 planetary boundaries and are moving towards increasing risk. And the sad part is, we're not even doing a good job of managing those resources. In the European countries, not a single one of us is actually fulfilling the basic needs of everyone in our country within the limits of the Earth. So despite all the consumption and material use, we're not distributing it in an equitable way. We have a consumption problem. Prior minor and mass extinctions were through volcanic pulses in the Earth's surface. This happened naturally. Today, we're heading towards a 6th mass extinction, of which we people will be a part due to our overconsumption. It's so important to know that we can't build our way or consume our way out of a crisis caused by overconsumption. It's really important to consider why we're here and how we can take responsibility and act. One of the things we see is that the world meets, we go to COPs, we talk about what we need to do, but we never really check economic growth. We never really check material consumption. We try to technology and innovate our way out of a growing problem. Yet, we are on a precipice, an important marker in our climate trajectory, where we have been at 1.5 warming degrees for a year. And our politicians don't really understand what this means. On a national level, on an industry level, we tend to use relative targets to say we need to make a percentage reduction so we can improve a little bit each year. But if we don't actually put this within context of Earth's limits and a remaining carbon budget, we're not setting the right targets anyways, regardless of whether or not we're keeping them. We have, on the one hand, what the planet wants, and then we have global objectives and policies we've agreed to, and there's a huge, huge mismatch. In our industry, we have a very good example of this through the Reduction Roadmap project, where we have tried to set targets in the building legislation that are based on finite planetary limits and a carbon budget, and our building code is a relative example. We ended up with a building legislation that, well, is an improvement in the short term from where it was supposed to be. We're actually overshooting the carbon budget with 120%. And our legislation is ending up in a way that it is less ambitious than it was in the BR23. We are moving rapidly towards critical tipping points. If you think about sitting in your chair, you know that point as a kid. You maybe only do it once or twice before you stop tipping in your chair, the point of no return. We're really, really close to that right now. The tipping points react in a way that they have cascading effects, right? So if our planet can no longer cool itself, if we lose the Arctic ice sheets, it's going to get warmer. If our forests are burning, the Earth cannot breathe. These things are connected. It's a finite system. And we are the most responsible. The global north is most responsible for both emissions and consumption. And it's not just the global north, it's the wealthiest 10%, which are responsible for nearly 50% of all emissions. So again, we need to think about equitable distribution of remaining resources. Those of us who are most responsible are least impacted by the changes that are coming. And if you think we're going to escape it, we're not. minimum, we're going to reach a 3-degree warming scenario. What this means on average globally, 3 degrees, that translates to 5 degrees on land and on average 8 degrees in cities. That's unbearable. We'll also see a reduction in agricultural yields. A lot of the world's population will have to migrate. Until now, we're not so hospitable to refugees, so that's something we also have to consider as we continue emitting. And a bit ironically, the places where we need materials the most are the places that will be inhabitable in the future. And if you think we can get out of it, we can't. Denmark doesn't produce much, right? We consume a lot from other places, but we're dependent on 6 other continents to have a good life here. Because of this, 1 in 8 people, so 1 in every row, is going to die. We have to take this into consideration. We have such a big responsibility to act. And acting is a way to actually change our values. That's why initiatives like this are so important. When we see a way forward that's both promising and deliver what people need for less, we should take it. I have a few principles that I think we should learn. The first, most important, is that it is possible for all to have a good life on this planet. But it requires a radical change in the way we distribute things and the way we consume. So we need to shift away from an economy of more, a culture of more, to one that focuses on sufficiency and what is enough for us to have a good life. Because what is enough for me might mean actually more for someone who's currently living in a resource-depleted place. I have a few principles that I think are critical in this transition that we must remember. 1, everything is connected. We must think systemically. In our industry, nothing is offside. If we are solving one side of the Rubik's Cube and neglecting the others, it's not actually solving the problem. We must also understand and accept there is no infinite anything on a finite planet. We must be careful with our resource use. We also have to understand that nothing comes from nothing. This is basic physics. Every action requires some kind of energy. We really need to consider this. Nothing is for free. We don't have net zero. Anything. And a final point is that we need to understand that there is no safe and just transition without justice. We have to actually consider that we are part of a living world of other species and a human world, people in faraway places that deserve just as much as we do here. Final word, takeaway, enough. In 2 ways, enough, like enough. Let's stop pursuing more just for the sake of wealth and power. And on the other hand, enough. We have to figure out what's enough. What do we really need to have a good life? Because most of us have that. We have had enough in the global north since 1975. Everything we've consumed beyond that is excess, right? So when we go to building projects, we need to think about this. What is enough? How can we do a lot more with a lot less? Thank you.